Hello, welcome to Museum Moments. My name is Ellie Gettinger, and I'm the Education Director at Jewish Museum Milwaukee. I'm delighted to join you today to continue our exploration of the Olympics. Last week, we started by looking at the lead up to the 1936 Berlin Olympics, in which the world talked about the prospect of creating a boycott because of the anti-Semitic oppression and other oppression that was going on in Germany from 1933 onward. After the international community decided that, probably it's not a problem for us to be at the Olympics, then it was up to Germany to actually put on a show, and a show they did put on. One of the things that we discovered in putting together this particular museum moment is that a lot of the things that we see as the hallmarks of the kind of pomp and circumstance of the Olympics have their roots in the 1936 Olympics, and that we wanted to explore some of those developments and connections while starting to talk about the way in which it provided a propaganda shield from the actual on-the-ground anti-Semitism and persecution that was going on in Nazi Germany. So let's explore some of those big stories, and feel free to chat or comment or share your thoughts with us right here. So there is this sense with the Olympics of building grandeur, building at a grander scale, changing the way that Olympics previously had been done. And the last, Germany actually was excluded from the Olympics in 1920 and 1924 because of World War I and the outcomes there. 1928, they re-enter the Olympic scene. And as I said last time, they have some huge advocates pushing for them to be the Olympic host in 1936, particularly as this is being awarded and the kind of conference is going on in the early 1930s. There's a sense that maybe this will push pro-democracy pieces in Germany, in interwar Germany. By 1933, the Olympics have been awarded. Hitler has come to power, and his first blush at this, as we talked about last week, was, I don't want as the spirit of internationalism and, everyone can be equal and fighting, not fighting, but showing their dominance on the field of play. I have a theory that Aryanism is the way to go, and nothing else should be at play here. And so he has to be convinced to take on the Olympics. But once he's convinced, and he's convinced by his propaganda minister, Joseph Goebbels, and a number of other people, that it really becomes this sense of, this is a way for Germany to show all of the things that we are developing as part of Nazi Germany and this Nazi identification. And we are going to do this at a scale that had not been seen in international competition before. So Hitler demanded that the Olympics exceed all previous games. And to that end, he took the existing sports spaces in Berlin and had those demolished and built entirely new facilities, which I think is one of the hallmarks of what we see in every Olympics going forward, that it's not what's already there, that you have to have what's new, next, and best in building your facilities. To that point, it was the most expensive Olympic Games ever. They built the grandest and largest complexes to date. They were all over Germany. They were showing kind of how German engineering and all of these sorts of ideas. It was 1 million Reichsmarks that were spent on this Olympics, and it's about $450 million in today's money. It was by far, as I said, the most expensive games. And it started what has become really kind of standard operating principle in the Olympics, that each Olympic Games is going to be more expensive with bigger bangs and more kind of fancy institutions with great global prominence, that's part of the piece of hosting the games. So for instance, as we look at the last couple of Olympics, and this is I believe this one's in London, that they're just these kinds of arm races of what the Olympic Pavilion should look like and who should be involved in the architecture and architects who are involved with those spaces. In addition, the amounts of money that go into them are kind of insane to think about. The total cost of the Rio Olympics was $13 billion. And I think the reported cost of the Tokyo Olympics at this point is $15.4 billion, but I did see that actual estimate might be low by about $5 billion. And when all of these countries started, when Tokyo started their bid, their estimate on how much that would be spent on the Olympics was about $7 billion. So it just goes to show you that there's never this kind of sense of kind of prudence and thrift in producing an Olympics. It's all about showmanship. And really, the 1936 Olympics is the start of that Olympic architecture race and the race for grander and bigger spaces. The other piece of this is something that I think of when I think of the Olympics. This is one of those things that just says Olympics to me. And I was surprised to learn that the Olympic torch bearing and the race, there had been a torch, there had been not a torch, but some sort of flame at the Olympics since the 1928 games. And it had been, but had not had any connection back to historic Athens. And this really fit very nicely in with the sense of Nazi propaganda that we're historic, that we're ancient, that we go back to the traditions of Rome and Greece and these very militaristic societies of the ancient world. And so they had the flame built out of stainless steel with this silver color. It's engraved, and it's taken from Athens, where it's lit by a parabolic, like kind of dish, and the flame is lit from the sun, as it would have been potentially in Helios thousands of years ago, and then is taken across Europe, and it's run over 19,000 miles, starting in Athens all the way through Europe. Over 3,500 people are torchbearers, and it becomes a form of media, kind of frenzy about the torchbearing itself. The man that you see in the center of this is a guy named Fritz Schilgen, and he was a distance runner. He ran 1,500 meters. He was selected because of his grace as a runner. There was a sense that he would enter the arena, and he would just be this beautiful presence. And he became kind of this moment became an international media moment, because one of the things that Hitler and the Nazi Party did, especially in advancing their propaganda goals for this Olympics, is they filmed a long-form documentary produced by Leni Riefenstahl called Olympia. And this scene of Fritz Schilgen running in is one of the iconic moments of that documentary. But the whole thing, the idea of the opening ceremony and the scale at which it took place, again, much larger than previous opening ceremonies. Over 110,000 people were present. You can see all of the swastikas that were part of this engagement to really showcase this is what New Germany looks like. This is the iconography. And it was very much at play within the ceremony itself. And we still see the torch today, and we see all sorts of different types of people running the torch for all sorts of different types of reason. But the kind of blueprint, the lighting in Greece, the running across multiple continents, the getting people involved and engaged, and then having a really bright, showy end point of that, as we witnessed on Friday in Tokyo with Naomi Osaka lighting the Olympic torch in Tokyo, still exists. And it's very much the symbol of the games and the symbol of the international community all coming together within the games. Now, the Berlin Olympics allowed for this kind of great lie to happen. And what I'd love to tell you here is, in looking at these words, is to think about someone like Gretel Bertram, who was an athlete in Germany. She was actually a world-class high jumper. And she was a Jewish athlete who at first was put on a team. And then very shortly before the Olympics was pulled off the team, she ended up immigrating to the United States. Had there been a 1940 Olympics, she would have been competing for the United States. She changes her name to Margaret. And one of the big things that all of the international community is kind of turning their blind eye to is about like what's happening to athletes like Gretel, and if they're allowed to be in the games or not. the other piece of this is more around the idea of an amateur athlete. Now, up until about the 1990s, that idea of being an amateur in the Olympics was incredibly important. That this was the thing that Avery Brundage kept pushing and pushing and pushing. And yet, in pre-World War II Germany, Hitler basically wanted to show German dominance by making sure that his athletes were the very best. So instead of having them be students and athletes at the same time, or people who were working in a trade and also doing sport, he paid their entire room, board, everything to ensure that their training was to ensure a German victory. So that idea of professionalism was certainly at play in the 1930s in Germany, and it's certainly something that we still see today at the Olympics. The games themselves became this propaganda win. People come in and they see what looks like a peaceful Germany. The German people are expected to show extreme hospitality, and that's come down from the government, that this has to look good for all people coming into the country, because the reports need to come out that Germany is a lovely place to visit and is not militaristic. So Jewish athlete Marty Glickman, who was a runner on the 1936 Olympic team, we'll talk about him a little bit more next week, says, "We were aware of the fact that there was anti-Semitism in Germany. We just didn't know what Nazism was. Remember," and I think this is an important caution, this is from the perspective of 2 years before Kristallnacht. The Holocaust was not only a thought, not only not a thought, it did not exist in our imagination, in our dreams. I was on the team. It was a goal I'd sought. Holocaust was a word I didn't even know in 1936. So in seeing this kind of picture, even as a Jewish athlete, he didn't really get the sense of this is a country that is at the edge of not just war, but of dehumanizing millions of people across Europe, because that wasn't what they were showing at that moment. Every part of this became a mass media event. There was radio coverage, there were newsreels, there's huge amounts of newspaper. And what had previously been kind of a more modest international event with limited reporting back and forth became a global event. This was the first time you really see the kind of broad interest in the Olympics that has become the kind of hallmark of our every 4-year life. The IOC said at the end of this, between the grand opening, the grand closing, all of the fabulous facilities, the increased attention, and then some really amazing sporting events that showed kind of the power of global sport, that this was the best games yet. And it also pushes the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, to become like an international player, that people are looking to them for what's new and next. I want to thank so many people for getting this together for me. First of all, my intern, Emma Gasinski-Rose, her name is not on here, but it should be. She scoured huge numbers of sources to develop this really lovely presentation and helped me kind of refine my thinking on this topic. I also want to thank Robin Cohen, who is our avid supporter and has done wonderful things in ensuring that museum moments can continue to happen. And next week for this series, we are going to be hosting Samantha Abramson, who is the director of the Holocaust Education Resource Center here. She was part of the research team for the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum's exhibit on the Berlin Olympics. And so we're really delighted to hear from her and her perspective on this. So join us again next week, and we look forward to seeing you. Thanks so much, and have a great day.